There are plenty of seats down here if you all want to come down, if you're looking for a seat. I'm Larry Jacobs. I am a faculty member here at the University of Minnesota, and I want to welcome you to the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. This is the School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. There's a program outside with the upcoming events. It is very exciting. We've got a terrific program coming up in about a month's time on whether or not there will be an independent running for President of the United States. And the two panelists are both well-known partisans. Larry Diamond, who's a well-known Democrat, and Vin Weber, a well-known Republican. It's an absolutely extraordinary program. That's March 7th. E.J. Dion's going to be coming in March 22nd to talk about his new book. We've got a terrific program on the partisan divide with two former members of Congress, one Democrat, one Republican. Peter Wiener, who's a well-known thought leader in the Republican Party, has been writing quite a bit about new directions in the Republican Party that may become quite popular as this year goes on. He'll be here on April 12th. And then, I think this is going to get me in trouble with my bosses, we've got a well-known economist coming in from Chicago who's going to be talking about big-time athletics, and his argument is it's time to pay the athletes. Wow. That's April 21st. We go for the big stuff here. We're very pleased to have this program today. I want to first welcome and thank my good friend Steve Sviggum, who former Speaker of the House. He's now faculty here at the Humphrey School, and we do a lot of work together, and it's one of my great pleasures of being here is to be working so closely with Steve Sviggum, just a great Minnesotan. Today's program is a preview of the 2016 legislative session. Obviously, things are going to be kicking off about a month's time, but this is about the right time to get a flavor for what's happening and some of the more current issues even before the session. So I'd like to welcome the two leaders. Speaker Kurt Daudt has joined us. Mr. Daudt represents House District 31A, and he has served 6 years before that as the Asante County Commissioner, and we're very pleased to have the Speaker. Thank you very much. And we're very pleased also to have with us Senate Majority Leader Tom Bakk, who represents Senate District 3 in the northeastern part of the state. Please give a warm welcome to Senator Bakk. This is like a rock and roll band. It's really close. Thank you both for coming today. First, let's just start off with, I think, an issue that everyone's concerned about, which is Governor Dayton's health. And we're curious if you have any information on where the governor's health stands at this moment.
Well, I don't have anything new other than what you've probably read or heard over the last 24 hours, but he's in good spirits and actually just sent us a letter moments ago here addressing the notion of a special session. So I know he's working because I just got a letter from him 10 minutes ago probably. So.
Okay, that's a good sign. When someone's working, it means they're functioning. So let's get right into that. Is there going to be a special session?
I just sent a response back moments ago indicating my support for a one-day special session to address the three issues that the governor has highlighted, Real ID, unemployment on the Iron Range and the mining industry, and the issue of the economic disparities among the colored community, not unique to just Minneapolis, but in other regions of the state also.
So the governor has the power to call a special session. Why doesn't he just get on with it?
You know the answer to that, Larry.
Speaker Daudt.
Well, this is something that I have brought up in many of our meetings, that the governor, frankly, should just call one. And really, he has nothing to lose. If he believes strongly, anybody who did anything, tried to play any games or bring up bills that shouldn't be in the special session would look pretty foolish. And I had given him my word that I certainly would not do that. My hope is that if he wants one, he will just call one, because getting to an agreement seems pretty difficult. We keep arguing over little things, and I think we're in pretty much agreement on two of the issues. The third being the inequity in the wages in the communities of color is a tougher issue. It's something that we didn't get here overnight, and we can't solve in a one-day special session. And of course, we want to talk about some of the long-term things too, which we believe it's directly connected to the achievement gap, and we really want to focus on making sure that we're giving these kids the best education that we can, which will give them the opportunity to be successful in their life.
Senator Bakk, do you think it's possible to have a special session on the first two issues you mentioned and not take up the racial disparities question?
I have a shorter answer to why the governor hasn't called it. The governor calls it, but only the leaders can decide when we go home. Mm-hmm. So governors are always very reluctant to get the legislature into session for fear that they're going to take on a larger agenda and drop some things on their desk that they might be uncomfortable with. So, well, I still would like to address all three and the Speaker's right. The dispute is, outstanding dispute is probably over the economic disparities issue. In the Senate bill, this economic development bill this last session, we had a number of grant programs that have been in law for a period of time. The House took some of it. We didn't get all of it. So I think there are some programming things over at the Department of Economic Development that have worked in the past that we could put some money into. For instance, the summer jobs program for youth. We've put money into that before. We didn't get much in there this year, but it seems like if we're going to try and create some summer youth employment, it's wise to get the money in the queue now so that they can get into the application process. They know what they have, so we know how many kids potentially we could put to work this summer. If it has to wait until the legislature adjourns on May 23rd, it starts getting pretty late to get an application process and get people actually employed.
And I take it that both of you agree if the special session does not happen next week, then it's not going to happen.
That's probably the case. I mean, I know the governor had set a deadline of
Speaker
a
Daudt.
couple of weeks ago now that he wanted to make a final go or no go decision. We're now, I think, 2 weeks or almost 2 weeks past that. I think today is probably the deadline. If we don't get agreed on some agreement on some language today, it's probably going to be difficult to have one. And if you were to call one, he gets to decide when we start. But the soonest I would think it could be is next Monday, and literally next Monday we're 4 weeks from regular session. So.
Thank you, Larry.
Speaker Svigum.
First of all, to help my friends out, and these are good people, by the way. These two persons you'd love to have as your brother, you'd love to have as your brother-in-law. They're good people. But a special session without a prior agreement would be an open door without a close. And I think Senator Davies remembers, Senator Kelly, maybe Representative Tingles did. I think there was 1 year, Jack, that we ended up with a special session overlapping the regular session start that was in the 80s sometime. And yeah, I think it was in the, well, a little jab. But I think it was like in the 80s and 90s, but whatever. You've got to have a closed door and you've got to have a prior agreement. Gentlemen, I think what I'd like to start with would be an overview of the legislative session. I was always somewhat concerned and somewhat frustrated at times during a session. We'd complete a session, think you did a good job, think you did a bad job, and you'd have one group out there giving you a 100% rating, and on the same issues, somebody else giving you a 10% rating from their standpoint. My question, I want to empower the two of you. I want you to be empowered. Tell me, if you would, what for you would, as we look into this 2016 legislative session, give me the 2, 3, 4, ABC. Give me the 3 things that you think would be important for this session to address for you, your caucus, or the legislature to be successful for Minnesota. Maybe, Tom, I'll start with you.
Policy or finance?
Either. Just give me 3 things. Give me ABC so we can judge you with your own parameters as opposed to you being judged by somebody on the outside.
First, I guess for me is probably that we don't make any decisions that hand off an unbalanced budget to the next legislature.
Okay.
There's a new legislature coming in this time next year, and I think you have an obligation to make sure that you've given them a balanced budget. And I mention that because, we're running a relatively small surplus right now, but what you need to know about that is most of that is one-time money. So it's very, very difficult to open up the budget and start doing spending that has, in legislative speak, tails in the next biennium, because when you spend money this year, it doubles for the next legislature to deal with. So some caution about the fact that the money we have is one time, so we make sure we have a balanced budget for the next legislature. I'd like to get something done on transportation, not just spending, but a plan, a long-range plan about how we're going to address the transportation needs of our state. And the third thing I was reminded of again yesterday when 4 of my 6 grandkids were home for the day to do a little snowmobiling on the lake. I would like to do something for families, for the family and sick leave type policies for our employers, so that Minnesota became even more family friendly. There are so many of us baby boomers moving off into retirement and are going to have more and more health issues over time, and I think it would be good if our children had the opportunity to be able to get time off work to care for loved ones that are having health issues, take them to the doctor. That is just, it meets one of the criteria of Minnesota Nice to me. So we're going to try pretty hard to convince the House that should be a priority.
Good balanced list from the majority leader. Speaker?
Thank you. There was a couple of things that were big priorities for my caucus last session that we ended up leaving on the sidelines, regrettably. Number one is some significant tax relief for Minnesotans. What exactly that looks like, I think we're somewhat open, but we'd like to do some things that we think are common sense. One of those would be exempting Social Security income from state income tax. We're one of 7 states, I think, that taxes retirees on their Social Security benefits. We charge them a state income tax. Most states don't do that. I often say that we can't rely on our weather to keep our retirees here in Minnesota anymore. But just things like that, things that make common sense. And the reality is, we're collecting more money than we need from Minnesotans to operate state government. I think we spent about $1.5 billion extra in the last session during this budget. There's another $1.8 billion in surplus right now. 600 million of that has gone to reserves by statute, so that leaves us with about 1.2. Tom and I, probably more than anybody in the state of Minnesota, will be watching the February forecast very closely to see whether there's been whether the trend of surplus revenue is continuing or whether we see a downtick. We're a little concerned that we may start to see some negative pressure in the revenue numbers, and that will be probably what decides what avenue we take in the next session. On top of the tax relief, we really, and I agree with Tom, we really want to have a long-term transportation plan, a road and bridge infrastructure plan, and we've been talking about it now for more than a year, and we really think it's well overdue. I know folks in the metro area have seen a lot of construction, but there's a lot of projects in greater Minnesota that need some work and some help, and I think folks, by numbers of 70 or 80% support a pretty good investment in our road and bridge infrastructure. So those will be our top priorities.
Okay. Very good, very good. Let's see if we can pull the two together then. Structural balance, Tom, I heard you say that, and that's very prudent, very wise into the out years. Tax relief, there is $1.2 billion available right now. February forecast is going to change it a little bit one way or another. What about a tax cut, Majority Leader?
Probably pretty difficult. If you look at the numbers for the next biennium, there's about $2 billion of revenue. Some of it's reduced spending, some of it's new revenue. Inflation in the next biennium, calculated by MMB, just nominal inflation is about $1.6 billion. So there's about $400 million in the out biennium for the next legislature to consider spending. So what that means is if we spent $200 million this year, it doubles in the next. You'd have essentially a structurally balanced budget for the next legislature. So it's going to be pretty difficult to put together a tax bill with tax reductions, knowing that's the money that's available. I would like to get a tax bill. There's hundreds of pages of things that are worth doing in there that don't cost money. I would like to put some additional money into local government aid and county program aid for cities and counties. The state needs to be a stronger partner with our local governments. That's where most services end up being delivered. And so to the extent we could provide some help there to help hold down property tax impacts in our local communities, I think would be a good goal, probably a better goal than cutting taxes for a whole lot of people that probably don't need the reduction, where local governments, if we could relieve some of the property tax pressure, I think that'd be
Speaker,
helpful.
This is what positioning for negotiating looks like.
Been there, done that.
Start low.
Speaker, I'm trying to listen to Majority Leader Bakk and help you both become successful, empowering each other as you lay out your parameters for this session. The senator doesn't seem real keen on a tax cut of some type or another, at least one that has some structural reductions to it, like Social Security, yet that's your number one goal. What's your response?
We'll get there. I think one of the things that we and one of the things that I have done, and I haven't been in St. Paul for a long time, but has just really a principle that guides me is let's just do what's right. Let's do what's right by Minnesotans, and I mean the bottom line is we are collecting more money than we need from Minnesotans. Yes, could we find 50 different ways to spend that money? Absolutely, but the bottom line is we in the last budget increased state spending by about 5%. The biennium before, when Democrats were in complete control, they increased spending in the general fund by I think about 12%. If you look at the curve of spending in state government, it's gone up kind of consistently. There's only been one dip, and really that was backfilled by federal stimulus dollars. So we passed a budget this last biennium that we think serves Minnesotans. It's a little higher than what I would have liked, but that's the art of compromise. As we look forward, I think we can't say that we should have spent, another 5% or something increase, and you have to look at this over long term to say what is sustainable. And everybody that comes in has a great idea for, a very noble cause in most cases. But we have to, Tom and I and our caucuses have to look at the big picture and make decisions about over the long term what's right. Like I said, we will be watching that revenue number very closely. If there is a continued uptick in revenues, if it continues to come in higher than projected, there will be no way to get out of here without a pretty significant tax bill. If there's a downtick and we start to have to take some more caution in our approach, because I'm concerned, like Tom is, about the future structurally. We don't want to send the budget into a deficit, but we have to be very cautious of that, so we'll be watching it very closely.
So what I hear the majority leader saying is what tax cuts are sustainable, and I hear you saying what spending is sustainable.
That's a good way to sum it up.
Well, kind of on that.
Senator Bakk.
And Speaker Svigum was there in charge in 1999. We went through about 6 years where we ran one economic forecast on top of another, where we had surpluses and surpluses and surpluses. And starting in my first session in 95, we cut taxes. We cut them again in 96 and 97, 98, 99, 2000. The money just kept coming in. And in 2001, we cut them again. And by the time Governor Plenty came in and the new legislature came in 2003, we had a $4.6 billion deficit.
That's very true.
And except for 2007, when we had a small little amount of money, most of it was one time, for a dozen years, 6 budget cycles, we were figuring out how to balance the budget. And we used every kind of accounting gimmick and shift that you can imagine. We even, remember the big tobacco settlement under Humphrey? We sold it. We sold it to somebody so that they could pay us money for the next 20 years to help balance our budget. We sold it up front. We sold about $2 billion of revenue for about $800 million as an accounting gimmick to try and balance our budget. And having lived through that, 2015 was the first time since 2001 that the legislature came into session with a balanced budget and actually had some surplus money to spend. Having lived through those difficult things we had to do, I do not want to put the next legislature in the situation of having to deal with a crisis after this 2016 election. So no one should think there's going to be a tax bill. If it's going to be about cutting taxes and plunging us back into managing deficits and in a state of crisis, it's going to be a pretty short session.
I think, Majority Leader, historically, and my memory is always short. It's not very good. I have a short one. But I do think in 2001 and 2007, we did come into the sessions with surpluses.
In one we did, and then we had that big tax bill, and that was the end of it.
We had September 11th, and then we, in 2007, we came in with a surplus too, I believe.
I think I said
Senator, Mr. Jacobs?
Speaker Daudt, the governor recently said that the money that would be spent on tax cuts would have to be matched by money spent on early childhood education. What are your views about that?
I think even he has backed down from that now. I know that, all-day pre-K has been a huge priority for the governor. It did not have legislative support last session. If he's talking about all-day pre-K in the context of wanting to enact that this session, it's almost impossible to do. In the second year of the biennium, it really needs to be done in a budget year, the first year of the biennium, when Democrats were in complete control of state government and they put all-day kindergarten in place. They did it so it happened the second year of the biennium. It's almost impossible for us now to pass something where kids start going to school in August of this year. It's just almost impossible for that to happen. It also is not something that any of the local school districts want. They don't have the room for the kids. It would be a huge underfunded mandate. And frankly, the data just doesn't back up that this is the right approach if our goal is closing the achievement gap.
So let's assume that the governor picks up from where he left off the 2015 session with compromise where money was going into scholarships and school readiness, Head Start, that sort of thing. Can you see a situation where there's a linkage between tax cuts and early childhood education spending?
I think we have to look at the entire budget in a bigger picture, and it's going to be difficult to say if you don't want to reduce taxes. Those same arguments are there then not to increase spending. If you spend the money, it's just the same as decreasing the taxes. So either one, in fact, I will say that either one has sent us into a deficit. It's funny when you look at the spending curve over the last 20 years, the revenue is not actually what has caused the deficit because spending has increased, in some cases almost exponentially, but spending has increased, at times over a biennium 10 and 12 and more percent. So it's actually the spending that's causing the deficits and the inability for the legislature in a charged political environment to be able to say no to folks sometimes. And we really have to be the ones who take the longer term approach in looking at this stuff, what makes sense for Minnesota. It's one of my biggest frustrations. Now, we run for re-election every 2 years, and we budget every 2 years, but it's very difficult, and the legislature doesn't do a good enough job looking beyond 2 years when they're looking at policies and spending and tax policy for that matter. So we all could do a better job of that. If the governor wants to do let me finish on the all-day pre-K. If the governor wants to pick up where he left off and he wants to enact that this session, that's kind of what caused the problem. Just the exact same problem that Tom was just talking about. When you enact all-day kindergarten in the second year of the biennium, it has about my numbers might be wrong, but I want to say $170 million cost. Well, that doubles then in the tails unless you cut the program. That's a little trick that I think Democrats, I'm sorry to be partisan, but it's a little trick that Democrats have used to put spending on this kind of an increase where we've seen 10 and 12% increases every biennium.
Senator Bakk, there's a pretty good increase in early childhood education spending in 2015. Is it time just to take a rest on that issue? Is there a reason that in a kind of non-policy, non-state budget year, this should be back on the table?
Well, it's very difficult to start opening up the budget in the second year of the biennium, and I can see how that would play out. You've got early childhood advocates over here. You've got advocates for the disabled and nursing homes and residential group homes over here. And how, I don't think in a non-budget year the legislature is going to want to be put in a position of having to pick between those two strong advocacy groups, even if all working with very vulnerable people. Even if we had the money to do it. So I think other than some small supplemental spending, there's some small amounts that are needed probably in most of the budget areas, but I don't look for any real large changes in any of the budget areas.
So this looks like maybe an area where there's a little bit of space between you and the governor?
We won't know because we're not going to see his actual budget proposal to the legislature until after the forecast, which I think comes February 26th. And then we'll see his budget after that.
You, both of you gentlemen, mentioned
Steve.
transportation plan as something that is long-term, needed in Minnesota, long-term vision. It would be something that would be passed that would both of you could point to as some degree of success as you laid out the parameters for the session. Where is the common ground there for a long-term transportation plan? Kurt, as Speaker Daudt, it looks like, you know, if you're going to have some $1.2 billion available, but you're going to do a tax cut, Social Security, you're going to do something for caregivers, there's not a lot of money left there. Give me an idea where you can go in a transportation plan to achieve success for Minnesota.
Sure, and that is going to be the big question, is the pinch that this is going to have on those surplus dollars. So that's why that February forecast is so important. You know, our plan, the governor obviously had proposed what I will say is the largest gas tax increase, or would have been the largest gas tax increase in state history. It, for the first time ever, was pegged to the price of a gallon of gas as a percentage. So as the price of a gallon went up, the gas would or the revenue collected would go up as well. I think that was a little opportunistic with low gas prices. They're actually even lower now than when he originally proposed that. About 2 to 1 Minnesotans are against increasing the gas tax. And frankly, at a time when state government has, you know, $2 billion worth of surplus revenue coming in, to increase a tax and take more money from Minnesota family budgets, it's just something that doesn't make logical sense. And really, to use that money, or to make an argument that, well, we need this money to pay for something that is such a core function of state government that it's defined in our Constitution as one of the basic core functions of state government. So to me, you pay for those things first, and then you pay for other things. And when we've got a $2 billion surplus, we can take some of that money and use that for our road and bridge infrastructure. And that's something that, you know, 70 or 80% of Minnesotans support, which is really broad bipartisan support. Now, I'm keenly aware that our plan takes money that currently is going into the general fund and puts it into the road and bridge fund to spend on roads and bridges. But we believe that's something Minnesotans support. The number that we have talked about is in the neighborhood of $6 billion that's needed over the next 10 years. And there's common agreement on that being the number. We believe that a gas tax isn't necessary. We believe we can fund that need with existing resources. The governor came out during the last forecast announcement and said that a gas tax was dead. It was off the table. We agree with him. I had made that statement, a year prior. Now he's trying to backtrack on that and say that now we need a gas tax on the table. I think that makes it more difficult to get to agreement. And I think the other outstanding issue, and maybe you want to talk a little more about this issue with some further questions, is the transit issue. And I'll be happy to address that a little more if you want to talk about it in a subsequent question.
Majority Leader Bakk, too, and I might not be fair to the comments I've read and seen, but Governor Dayton basically did scuttle gas tax hike after the forecast in December 2nd or whenever day it was. But Tom, I think I heard you say, or been reading in the papers, so you say, well, the Senate has dealt with it. The Senate has passed the gas tax hike. It's in the conference committee. We stand by it. I don't see a lot of common ground there, even though you both say there's money needed.
Well, that's the difference between just spending some money on roads and bridges, some one-time money that we have, and we could do some of that. And I actually am going to propose that we spend some of this one-time surplus money to supplement the state bonding bill this year, rather than, when you've got some money, why borrow everything? Why not use some of your cash to invest in some public infrastructure projects? But it's not a transportation plan if you've got a little surplus money one time and you infuse a couple $100 million into some roads and bridges, only to hand off to the next legislature no money and no plan. So, and it really needs to be constitutionally dedicated. You know, there's an old expression at the legislature, one legislature can't bind the next one. So the problem with putting transportation into the general fund is the next legislature will have to decide, whatever the resources are, well, what's more important here? Taking care of our elderly citizens and our nursing homes and our health and human service needs, our K-12 education, our early childhood. Are we going to let tuition keep running off the charts? And as popular as transportation is, it will never compete with health care for vulnerable and disabled people. It will never compete with education for money. So the next legislature, just like we have for decades, will just kick it down the road for the next legislature to deal with. So it needs to be a dedicated source of funding, like the gas tax or like license tabs that actually go into the Highway Trust Fund and are constitutionally committed for transportation.
So Senator Bakk, how does transit fit into this picture? And there's a long-standing tension, obviously, between different parts of the state, with transit tending to be more metro-focused. There's been talk about relying on metro-wide sales tax or other kinds of mechanisms. Given the kind of conversation here about what might be possible and where the common ground might be for compromise, what do you see as a reasonable goal in terms of transit?
Well, actually, there was probably, to back up, one of the problems with being around a while is you realize you made some mistakes in the past. Back in that 2001 tax bill that plunged us into a decade of deficits, at that time, in this 7-county metropolitan area, there was $130 million a year on your property tax that helped pay for transit. And we took it away. And we shifted that cost over to the general fund to compete with everything else in the budget. And transit has been pretty starved since then. Everybody hates property taxes and favors sales taxes because somehow sales taxes are considered to be discretionary. You only pay it when you buy something. But don't we love property taxes when we go to see our accountant and get our income taxes done and we find out it's a deduction? So the problem with the sales tax is it's after-tax dollars, and the property tax really is deductible when you file your income tax. So now the advantage of the sales tax is some of it is exported to people who maybe don't live in your community. So there's pluses and minuses, but it seems like if the metropolitan areas, the county commissioners are willing to tax themselves to build out transit systems, we ought to give them the authority to tax themselves. They had the authority to do it when they could put it on the property tax levy. The legislature took that away. Just seems like if we're not going to give them the levy back, then we should give them the opportunity to expand on the sales tax they already have for transit, and they'll own the increase. I'm not too interested in actually imposing a transit sales tax and I don't think rural members want to vote for something like that, and I don't think it's fair for us to. But if those county commissioners want to do that and build a long-term transportation plan, I support that.
Well, Senator Bakk, what about a constitutional amendment for, 2006 we did a constitutional amendment, MPES. Do you remember that?
I didn't vote for that one either.
Oh, I did. I did.
It's about $300 million a year out of the general fund. But that was back when we had money.
Yeah. It passed, I think, at that time.
Because it was free.
Senator Bakk, your chair of your transportation committee, I think, is Senator Dibble, and he has mentioned the potential of a constitutional amendment for dedication to get around that argument of one legislature can't bind another one, to do a constitutional amendment for like the auto sales tax repair dollars. What do you think about that?
I think there's probably going to be bills introduced. Something could land up on the ballot. What I worry a little about is what if it fails? And then we're right back where we were. So although I'm interested in discussing it, I'd like to know kind of what's the mechanism in the event voters reject it. In the event voters figure out, well, hey, it's just taking money from my schools, or it's just taking money from the colleges and universities, or it's just taking money from the nursing home in my community. And don't underestimate voters' ability to figure that out. And if it fails, then what? We've just kicked it down the road.
Speaker, do you have common ground with Senator Dibble?
I think we're open to discussing that. We haven't talked about it as a caucus yet, but we believe statutorily dedicating it is fine. I think it's pretty difficult for somebody in the future to say, well, we're going to take from roads and bridges, which is incredibly popular, and move it somewhere else. I don't know that it ever gets undone. But if we did put it on the ballot, I would say that we would statutorily dedicate it for this biennium, and then the voters can decide in November whether it gets constitutionally dedicated going forward. To me, that would answer Senator Bak's question of what happens if the voters reject it? Well, what they did is they just turned your 10-year plan into a 2-year plan, and then you got to come up with the rest of the plan for the 8 years. But I think it's pretty difficult to see a path where the voters would say, don't take a few $100 million of surplus revenue and put that into roads and bridges, which is a 70 or 80% issue. So, and I think I want to also go back on the transit thing really quickly. The governor has been vocal saying that transit needs to be part of the solution. And when I think when most people hear transit, there's some what I would say good transit and some I don't want to say bad transit, but transit that I think is much more controversial. And what I mean by that is for instance, this train out to the West Metro, Southwest Light Rail or whatever it's called. This is a $2 billion project, and I do not believe that it has the votes in the legislature to pass on its own. They're saying they want another, I forget the number, $130 million of state money, I think, and that the local governments are going to pay for the rest. They don't need any more state money. They can pay for it all if they choose. However, I don't think a project of that size and that scope should be able to proceed without legislative approval. And there's one reason the governor says that transit needs to be part of the solution, and it's very simple. It doesn't have the votes to stand alone and pass by itself. And to me, I think this is the core of what people dislike about government. Taking a bill for roads and bridges that has 70 or 80% support from the public and tacking something onto it that can't stand on its own, that's a great way to make people mad at you. And I'll go back to my earlier comments where I said I think you got to do what's right by Minnesotans. And if Minnesotans supported that sort of transit in large numbers, we'd all be doing it. But the fact is that they don't. And what I'm afraid now is that Met Council is going to do this on its own and kind of bind the state to future spending without legislative approval. And I think it's wrong.
We've got a number of questions here from the audience. Senator Bakk, this is a question from the audience. 12 states have implemented driver's license programs for undocumented people. Will the Minnesota legislature pass a similar kind of program?
Well, why don't we ask the Speaker, because the Senate's already passed the bill. So the votes are there in the Senate. We sent it over to a Democratic House and they didn't pass it, and we sent it over to a Republican House and they didn't pass it. So the Senate's ready to send it over again if the House is willing to take it up. I don't know why we take another vote on it if they're not going to take it up, but.
Speaker, the ball's in your court.
And not just mine. It was my predecessor too. It has been a controversial issue in the House. I think everybody understands the issue, and I think we understand the safety issues and aspects and ability to have insurance and some of those things. But it is and has been a controversial issue, and I think the reality is folks are worried about the political ramifications of it. I think that's why it hasn't passed under Democrat control or Republican control. It is a controversial issue, and I think it's an issue that probably needs some education with the general public. And frankly, we are going to have a conversation this session about driver's licenses, whether we like it or not. With the Real ID issue, we will be talking about this, and I suspect it'll be a big issue again this session.
One of the questions that was submitted simply asked, are you willing to meet with a delegation of businesses and community leaders to talk about this issue and maybe some steps forward?
Yeah, I absolutely am, and I've told them that in the past, and I think we need to continue to have those conversations, but it's not just a matter of convincing me. I think folks, there needs to be some education to the public on this issue if folks feel strongly about it.
Senator Bakk, I want to ask you a question about healthcare reform. Premiums in the individual market went up double-digit. We just had a report from the legislative auditor who reported, very substantial sums may have been spent inappropriately on individuals who are not eligible, either for the public programs or for MNsure. Is this effort in Minnesota, well-intentioned for sure, been a failure? Is it time to hand it off to the federal government as Oregon, Maryland, and other states have done?
Well, there's no question that the healthcare reform that the federal government implemented through the ACA, that Minnesota benefited less than most states. I mean, at the time that the ACA was passed, Minnesota had about 94% of our citizens insured. Much, much better than, we're at the top of the list maybe with Massachusetts for the job Minnesota was doing related to insuring our citizens. So we didn't get the kind of benefit that many other states did. You know, there was pretty broad agreement that the state should have its own exchange and not default to the federal exchange, which a lot of states did. And it was bipartisan support. The State Chamber of Commerce came out and said, no, we should have a state exchange. But the technology has been more than challenging. The vendors that put together the technology for people to enroll, and when they had some kind of life changes to re-enroll, has been just terrible, and still is having problems. We got calls, my office got calls just last week. People got a 2-day notice that they were going to be out of Minnesota Care on February 1st. Got calls last Thursday and Friday. And pure technology problems with the programming. So a lot more needs to be done there. And, you know, but as far as the premiums go, you know, I was watching one of the recent playoff games in football, and I couldn't help but notice that almost all the ads were pharmaceutical companies. Did anybody else notice that? Someone's paying for that, right? I mean, the cost of pharmaceuticals are going absolutely out the ceiling and is becoming a larger and larger factor in the cost of health insurance every year, and a lot of good stuff happens from it. I mean, I took a couple Tylenol this morning, and my arthritis in my shoulders feels a lot better, right? I mean, we can do a lot with drugs now, but it's
his casting shoulder.
Very expensive. He couldn't say it's my carpenter one.
Right, no, it's his casting shoulder.
But just on this issue about turning over the exchange to the federal government, there have been, you know, states that are controlled by Democrats who've done this, and after they've run into problems with the operations and the IT, Minnesota has made a very good faith effort. We've really put our shoulder to the grindstone. I think the state probably stands out in the country in terms of its expertise and its history on healthcare. But this has just been a bear. Why not just turn it over to the federal government?
Well, if the governor proposes that, the legislature is probably going to be willing to take a look at it. And the governor actually has, I've had conversations with him about was it the right thing to do a state exchange, even though it seemed like it had a lot of support from labor and business and Republicans and Democrats, that we would do better to control it. We'd do a better job locally administering it. But, I mean, it could be.
Speaker Daudt, I know that you feel pretty strongly that it's time to turn it over to the federal government. You've said that a number of times, but I want to ask you a slightly different question about this. When health reform was being debated in Congress in 2009 and 10, the assumption was that Republicans would support state exchanges. Why? Because who would want a one-size-fit-all federal government program run from Washington? And it's been really striking that, at least on the exchanges, not Medicaid, but on the exchanges, that you know, Minnesota kind of fits into a pattern of let the federal government run this. We don't want to have anything to do with it. Why not kind of keep it local on the exchanges? Why this turn it over to the federal government?
I think the answer is really simple, because keeping it local has been an unmitigated disaster. I mean, it has been, if you look at all of the expenses, we have a $300 million website, and we just got a report from the legislative auditor that because we're not correctly analyzing whether these people qualify or not, which means our website's not working properly, or it's not connecting in with other systems properly, that we might have as much as, you know, I think the low number was 115 million in fraud, or people who are getting benefits who shouldn't be, and it might be 200 plus million. The problem is it's not working. And, you know, the folks at MNsure, well, I know they work hard and I know they mean well, aren't helping the situation, because they that day did a press conference saying that we've met our enrollment goals. No, we haven't met enrollment goals. The only way that they meet enrollment goals is by revising them downward continually. By the end of this year, we're supposed to have 450,000 people on MNsure. Right now, we have about 70,000. I don't know what the number was supposed to be right now, but my guess is it was 250 or 300,000 or more that we're supposed to be on. The only reason we're meeting enrollment goals is because they have continually revised them downward. And to me, that's covering up the fact that this isn't working. We've got to be honest that this has been a failure in Minnesota. I mean, we had folks, I remember the commissioner came out and said that that there was going to be a 4% increase. This was the year before, not last year, but the year before, about a year ago. When the dust settled, we found out that it actually was more like a 40% increase in the average increase for folks that were on MNsure. To me, and this is a commissioner whose department literally exists to protect consumers, and they were lying to consumers about the result. Why? I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that they're so in love with the idea, they're not willing to admit that there's any problems with it. But there are other parts that are working so well, it boggles my mind. I had a lunch meeting with a friend last week, not related to the legislature, and this friend was telling me they needed to go and sign up on MNsure. So they went in and they put their entire family in, and it said that their son qualified for Medicaid. And they didn't want to sign their son up for Medicaid. The system automatically, without their permission, signed the son up for Medicaid. And now they're trying to get the son off of Medicaid and back onto their health care plan. So if we don't think that this is an on-ramp for cycling everybody into Medicaid and getting everybody into a single-payer system, which the public, frankly, doesn't support. And I'll agree with Tom.
I support.
Well, okay, Tom does. The general public, I don't think, does. But I'll agree with Tom that what we had in Minnesota was a better system than most states. And frankly, what we should have done was exported our system to Washington instead of importing Washington's system to Minnesota.
Senator, did you want to respond? No?
He did.
I just have an interesting observation watching these presidential debates. I got to tell you, my hat goes off to Bernie Sanders. I've been thinking, we have national health care. You just have to be 65 years old to get it. Someone finally said it, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. That's all.
New topic. Speaker's favorite.
Gentlemen, racial disparities, addressing the achievement gap. You've discussed this in preparation for a special session over the past month and a half. Some say it's too sensitive to address the real problems of racial disparities. I personally think it's the biggest problem we have facing our state of Minnesota in the future. To the both of you, what approach would the both of you have? Or let's start with Speaker Daudt. Speaker Daudt, what approach might you have to address the issue of racial disparities?
I would agree with you, Steve. I think it is one of the biggest problems facing our state, and frankly, I want all Minnesotans to be able to make more money and have the opportunity to make more money, and frankly, there is a direct connection between our low statistics on income equality for folks in this community. There's a direct connection between that and the fact that we have the highest achievement gap in the country. And what that means is that our low income and minority students aren't getting the same education. And the gap between them is the highest in the country. And just like I believe that's un-Minnesotan, I believe it's un-Minnesotan that we have this high disparity in wages just because of, not just because of race, but it's magnifying itself there. And we can't solve one problem without addressing the other. The fact that these kids are less than a 50% graduation rate in a lot of cases in the Minneapolis school district is just it's not only un-Minnesotan, it's shameful. I think that we all think that we have a great education system, and I have the honor of serving in the legislature with one of my high school teachers, Representative Sandra Erickson, and I think highly of the public education that I received, but if that's not working, we need to do whatever we can to make sure we get these kids the best education we can give them so that they can graduate and they're equipped for being successful in their careers in the future. And the fact that we have this great wage disparity is absolutely directly connected to the fact that we're not equipping these kids and giving them the opportunity to be successful. So I have very strongly, I know we talked earlier about the money for early education. What we ended up doing last session actually was my position, which was let's invest in early education scholarships, because the data actually shows that will reduce the achievement gap and has a much higher percentage of reducing the achievement gap than another investment. Why should we be spending money putting preschool kids in Edina or kids into preschool in Edina when their parents are already paying for it and they're not asking for it? And the kids in North Minneapolis are going into a program that has a less success rate than what we could be doing for them. Let's target our dollars at making sure that we get those kids into a program that will work for them. It shouldn't be just rich kids that have the choice to go to a private school if they want to. And I think that's un-Minnesotan.
Leader Bakk?
Well, we didn't get here overnight. This has been a problem that has been festering for a long, long time. And those parents can already enroll their kids in any one of 350 school districts in the state. Who knows how many buildings that is? We can thank Rudy Perpich for that. This was the first state in the country that created open enrollment so a parent could take their kid, and if you want to put them in Edina, go put them in Edina. You want to put them in St. Louis County rural schools, move to the range. We could use more kids in our schools.
Need some jobs up there, though.
But, the working group that the speaker and I put together have taken some really, really powerful testimony. I think first is understanding the problem and what's creating it. And I don't think we know. It's a multifaceted problem. And I did talk with the speaker and the governor recently about maybe in this special session on this issue with economic disparities, we ought to create some kind of a task force that is given a mission and is mandated to come back to the legislature and try to identify this problem for us. The opportunity to get it done in the busyness of a legislative session when every lawmaker is juggling a number of issues in any given time, there just isn't the time to focus on that. So more research has to be done as to, first, I think, identifying why we have the problem, and I think educational opportunities is certainly a piece of it. But I'm pretty committed to try to get our arms around it and see if we can make some progress on it. We didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to fix this overnight either. And part of the problem with trying to focus just on education is it doesn't do anything for the whole cohort of people that are already adults, that are already badly either unemployed or underemployed. So it needs to be more than just an educational strategy.
Senator Bakk, I'm just curious, when you look out at the state, and particularly here in the Twin Cities, where we've seen some quite intense protests that have been led by Black Lives Matter and others, do you think that's going to be adequate? I mean, do you think that's responding to these, quite, vocal protests and, statements of Minnesota falling down on the job?
Well, I think they probably need to do more the Black Lives Matter type movement to identify a specific goal. And I haven't seen anybody really articulate that yet. And the reason I say that is to keep any kind of a movement alive. Remember Occupy Wall Street? Gone, isn't it? Right? I mean, you can't find it anywhere. You have to have a specific objective in mind, and you have to incrementally, to keep the movement alive, bring forth some successes, incremental as they might be, so that the people that are participating in keeping the issue in front of people feel like their time is worth it. They're getting some successes. So I think that means you have to have kind of a long-term, an objective and kind of a long-term strategy with some little mile markers in there where you reach some levels of success. Because if all it is a protest with no measurements about how we're making some incremental success, it probably will fall apart, because the people that are trying to participate will feel like they're wasting their time if they're not making any headway.
Speaker Daudt, one of the big issues this session will be bonding. Governor Dayton has proposed $1.4 billion of projects for bonding. 220 million of that is focused on improving water. And then there's, nearly 100 other programs that he's got laid out. What's your mindset in terms of, you got to get into the details, the committee process has to work, but what's your general orientation and thinking about bonding and where it's heading and the water projects and the governor's agenda as he's already laid it out?
I know that both of our bonding committees, the Senate and the House, have been out touring potential projects, and this year, just like probably every other year, we get $3 or $4 billion of requests, and ultimately that gets pared down. Some of the things in the past that I haven't liked, and I think that frustrates the general public about bonding, is when we put projects in that kind of are seen as wasteful spending. And in St. Paul, they call that buying votes for a bonding bill. So bonding has a higher threshold. We need 81 votes in the House. And in order to get those, you almost always have to cross the aisle and pick up votes from the other party. So typically they put in some horrible project that shouldn't probably get funded and buy some votes from somebody, and it's a terrible process. So what I have told my bonding chair and our members is, let's try to put together a bill that really almost everybody in the chamber should want to vote for. Something that's really heavy in transportation infrastructure projects or other important infrastructure projects that are of regional or statewide importance, and try to stay away from some of the stuff that I think in the past has been viewed as wasteful spending or shouldn't probably be included in a bonding bill. And I know that other members of the chamber don't agree with that, but frankly, I think the use of bonding dollars for some of these projects has kind of gotten perverted over time from what it probably should be used for or was meant to be used for. So when we're borrowing money and incurring debt for the state, it should be something that has very broad bipartisan support. It should have regional support, and it should be of significance. So I'm being a little general, and I apologize, Larry, but I think that if we focus on projects that generally people view as being important projects, I think it'll make that bill much less controversial.
But let me just get to the big question.
How much money? Is that the question?
You read my mind. The governor says
I haven't been here a long time, but I'm catching on. No.
Let's make some headway here.
I think we're open. I always hate putting a number on and I'm not somebody that likes to position for negotiations. When Democrats controlled the whole thing, they did a bonding bill of about $1 billion for the biennium. That was the number in the prior, when Republicans had the House and the Senate, and Governor Dayton. I think it's about the 10-year average. I think that's kind of the number we're looking at, but I'm open if folks decide they don't want to do it all in borrowing and we want to do some cash. If we have that flexibility, I think that probably makes sense. So we're open, and we're going to go through the process. But I think 1.4 is probably too much, but I don't know what the number is.
But $1 billion doesn't sound incredible to you.
It doesn't sound what?
Incredible, kind of unimaginable.
No, that's what has been the 10-year average. I think as long I'm more concerned about what's in the bill than I am about the final number. And I know what everybody's told you about Republicans. I'm supposed to be just dug in and not flexible. But
we like that about
break
you.
those stereotypes.
We like that.
Senator Bakk, to follow through on that, the Senate always likes bonding, loves bonding.
It's because we take the longer view of
Yeah,
The upper body.
there is another perspective from the constitutional charge of the supermajority. It's supposed to make it hard to pass a body bill. In fact, it makes it it makes it larger rather than what the constitutional forefathers and mothers originated or thought about. Senator, the bonding bill that Larry was talking about, are you looking at the governor's number as being appropriate, or?
Well,
It's a big number.
I did notice that the Vermilion State Park's not in his proposal.
Okay,
So-
that makes it 1.43.
So it just got a little bigger.
Yes, yeah.
Do you see how it works now?
Let me guess, the majority leader is going to get his project in the bill. I'm going to guess that.
Well, it's not mine. We are building what is going to be the most premier state park in the Midwest, up on Lake Vermilion. And when you get a chance to come see it when it's done,
Just
you are
happens to
gonna-
be in
you
his
are gonna
district.
be- you're going to be proud of it.
Would you feel the same about that if it was in Crown, Minnesota?
He actually probably would.
If you had a lake like Vermilion, yes. Well, it's true. It's easier to pass a big bill than a small one. It is the one area where, except in some very unusual circumstances, we have to have bipartisan votes in order to get something passed. So I actually haven't looked at the spreadsheet on the governor's bill yet, so I'm not sure what all is in there. I know some people have told me that there's nothing in there for roads and bridges. I think it's pretty unusual for the legislature to pass a bonding bill that doesn't have some kind of local road and bridge component in it. So that might make it a little bigger yet. But it's interesting. In all my years, I've never served on the bonding committee. But almost everybody, when we reorganize, almost everybody wants to be on it. It's the biggest committee we have. Members must think if they can get on it, committee members have a better chance to get their project in the final bill, I guess. But I tell you, I take my hats off to all those bonding committee members, House and Senate both, bipartisanly, that have been traveling all over the state for months to look at projects. Because really, there is something special about actually being on the ground and looking at what a project is all about in a community versus sitting at the Capitol and having somebody come and do a PowerPoint presentation for you. So, and the one that kind of sticks with me is I went down to Red Wing, not with the bonding committee, but just to meet with the city and to tour Red Wing shoes. And the city took me down and showed me their docking project they want to do on the river. To try and make the river more usable for members of the public coming by boat. And I do hope that in 2018, when Viking Cruise Lines announced their riverboat cruises, that Red Wing is one of the stops, and it'll be a wonderful thing for the community. So but really, actually getting out on the ground and seeing the projects is really, really helpful in helping you make some decisions about what's in and what's out at the end. So my hat's off to all
both
the
of you-
members who've been doing that.
Both of you agree that the content is what matters to you. But just in terms of kind of the overall shape of this, does $1 billion sound like the right territory? The governor will come down a little bit, Republicans will come up a little bit, and you end up with $1 billion?
Probably a little small. Well, the governor's at 1.4 and he was at 1.
Yeah.
At 1.2, we can probably get pretty close to.
Okay.
Find
Let me
another.
ask a question. We're almost out of time here, and it's a kind of a wonky question, but Senator Bakk, I think this will kind of hit home with you as a good government type, which has to do with the reserves, the rainy day fund. Minnesota is actually now being hailed by other states such as Wisconsin, but also the kind of watchdogs of state budgets around the country. And Minnesota now has a rainy day fund of a bit more than $1.5 billion. We have a surplus of 1.9, and almost $600 million of that is going to be going into the rainy day fund. The state fiscal bosses say it should be up above $2 billion. Do you think we're getting to a point though where it's so much money that maybe we can lighten up? Maybe there's a need to kind of slow down on how much we're building that rainy day fund?
Well, I think we will slow down as soon as the economy turns south and there's not enough money to pay for things that people think are important. That's really the point of it, is when your economy slows down so that you have a mechanism that you can draw some money from in order to build a bridge until times get better. So the Senate is pretty proud of that provision. It's something that the Senate put in a conformity tax bill in 2014 and sent over to the House. And the bond rating houses out east are talking about it. I mean, they are talking about it nationally, about what Minnesota is doing, about building kind of a good government budget reserve. So it's really, really the right thing. And it does have a mechanism in it so that it will blink off and money will quit going in when we get to, it's about 4%, I think, of our whatever our spending number is. So if the money keeps coming in and every November we keep putting money in, eventually we'll quit putting money in. But it's a moving standard that will move with the state budget.
Speaker Daudt, are you equally enthusiastic about this really, really good idea?
Well, no, but I'll tell you what else the bond rating agencies were really excited about, and we got some favorable comments earlier this year about the fiscal prudence of our budgeting. I mean, for the first time ever, we left our regular session last year with a balanced budget, and we left with $1 billion unspent. $1 billion unspent on the bottom line. That was incredibly difficult to do. Remember, the governor was literally proposing to spend every last penny of that $1 billion. And the bond rating agencies liked the fact that we didn't spend every resource we had available. So I think it's important to recognize that being fiscally prudent is what's going to get us back to that AAA bond rating. And frankly, our reserves are almost full. This mechanism that Senator Bakk is talking about does have a cap. Once we get to that percentage, we're almost there. And I remember, I was sworn in 5 years ago, elected and sworn in 5 years ago. When I got sworn in, there was a $6 billion deficit and not a penny in the reserves and not a penny in the cash flow account. And to look at where we've come in 5 years is incredible, and I think none of us wants to get back there. It's important that we do have some reserves, and I think this mechanism, we're going to fill it shortly, probably the next forecast. Hopefully, if we don't get a downturn, it doesn't fill in the February forecast. It fills only in the November forecast. So I think by next November it'll likely be full if we continue to even get modest increases in our revenue forecasts.
We're almost out of time, and I very much appreciate that both of you have been so substantive and such good humor. I do want to turn, though, to the issue of the November elections. This is an unusual year in Minnesota. We've got the presidential election, and then the big action is going to be in the state legislature. The Democrats trying to hold the Senate, and then the Republicans trying to hold the South. Let me just quickly, because we only have a few minutes, but Speaker Daudt, what do you think will be the one issue that would have the most impact on voters in the fall in terms of holding your majority in the House?
I think, I don't know if it's one issue or just the fact that what I have tried to do is connect with voters on issues they care about, be reasonable, and do what's right. And I think connecting with Minnesotans on those values, I think in the last session, I was probably, I don't want to use the word underestimated, but I think folks thought that me being the new guy, we were going to get rolled over. And frankly, I think we did some really great things. Some of those were initiatives. I think about the money we put in nursing homes. That was one of my biggest priorities, and something that we prevailed on. Was a Republican position, but I think it was really the right thing to do, and it was important. But also, I think not increasing the gas tax and doing some things that I think generally the public thinks will be hurtful and harmful. The House has flipped. The reality is, 4 of the last 5 election cycles, we have a majority right now that's a little different than we've ever had. I think it's a little stronger than we've ever had. Our majority, we picked up 10 of our 11 seats were in Greater Minnesota, and 8 of the 11 we picked up were seats that Romney carried in the last election. So we feel good about our majority, but we also know with no statewide races, it means Democrats can bundle their resources and frankly spend them against us. So we're optimistic, but we're gonna work hard, and we think we deserve to be reelected.
Senator Bakk, what's the kind of the main plank that you think voters should be thinking about heading towards November?
Well, running legislative campaigns is a lot different than statewide strategies. I'll make a prediction for you. A Democrat is going to win the presidential race in Minnesota. We have the longest run of the 50 states for electing a Democrat president, back to 1972. No other state goes back that far. I think there's kind of 2 things. turnout. Turnout really matters. Not having any of our other statewide offices on the ballot is problematic. I think it'll be interesting to see when the nominees shake out, Democrat and Republican, how much enthusiasm there is on the part of voters about their choices. And that will, I think, largely drive the turnout, how much enthusiasm there is about the presidential race. Historically, the higher turnout tends to benefit Democrats, but I will just say the control of the legislature will be determined by the quality of the candidates in a small number of races. And good candidates win elections, especially if you get decent turnout. And I'm pretty happy with the way things are going in the Senate. Our recruitment is going. Met a bunch of the new candidates last Saturday. We had a little candidate forum event for them to meet and kind of give them kind of their first marching orders about how to win. But it's just, I'm a little bit concerned about today at least, the amount of enthusiasm there is about the presidential election, because better turnout tends to favor my caucus.
That is a very candid assessment. That would have been very close to what I would have said. We're out of time. I want to thank my good friend, former Speaker Svigum, and a faculty member here at the Humphrey School. Thank you very much, as always. And I want to thank our two terrific leaders. I've been doing this a while, and you two are really two of the finest we've had. Thank you very much,
Very
Senator
simple.
Bakk,
Thank you.
Speaker Daudt.